Hello and welcome to the Leaders Council podcast, the podcast for the people who run the country and the people who keep the country running. You join us on a sunny day here in the capital in a week where we're not quite sure whether a global pandemic or Russian interference poses a greater threat to the country. I'm sure time will tell on that one. I am your host, Scott Challoner, and each episode I aim to bring together two unique perspectives on leadership. Later on in the programme today we'll be joined by former England cricket captain Sir Andrew Strauss, but first and foremost I'm delighted to be joined by Katherine Buchan, the Director of Venue Search, a London-based company which offers a venue finding service for firms wishing to organise all manner of events, including conferences, meetings, awards evenings and more. Katherine, very warm welcome to you, and thank you ever so much for taking the time to join us on today's programme.
My pleasure. Good morning, Scott.
It's a real pleasure having you with us as well. The reason we're here, Katherine, is of course to understand your take on leadership first and foremost. So if we dive straight in by taking that word leader aside and considering that in a little bit more depth, I'm interested to know what that word actually means to you and what you feel the role of a leader is.
I think it's a person who within a company is willing to take responsibility, someone who can see the big picture, understand what is best for the company overall, and take the right decisions, even if they're not necessarily, the most popular ones, but always have a view as to what is best for the company in the short term and the long term. But I think any leader is only as good as the team they have around them. And probably the most crucial thing that any leader can do is ensure that they employ the right people and people who work well together, people who work well as a team. And a leader on their own is really absolutely useless unless they have the right people with the right tools and the right attitude to do the job.
And how would you describe your sort of personal leadership style, Katherine?
I think I've always thought that the best way to treat people is to treat them as you would want to be treated yourself, and to be open with staff and to listen to them, and to be prepared to change your style, your attitudes, depending on the input from other members of the team.
And working in the events industry as you do, I suppose one of the greatest challenges for leadership in the sector and indeed in various industries and communities worldwide is the ongoing COVID-19 situation. How have you found yourself having to adapt to the challenges that the pandemic has thrown about? Because I can imagine the lockdown in particular has made things very, very difficult for you.
Yes, it's been absolutely devastating for the events industry. The events industry is worth over $32 billion to the UK economy. And we've suddenly found ourselves, all companies, large and small, in the same position as having to cancel hundreds, if not thousands, of events that we'd spent, months, years putting together. As booking agents, we work in quite an unusual way in that we don't actually get paid unless an event takes place. We work on a commission basis. So we could have spent years working on an event, which has now been cancelled, and we now don't get paid. So that's very tough to take, but it's the way our industry works, and we will work that way again successfully in the future. But it's been, extraordinarily challenging for all companies within the events industry. And, we spent the first probably 6 weeks just cancelling everything we had in our books as clients, decided to sort of pack up shop until they had more clarity as to what can happen going forward.
When you sort of are staring down the barrel of a storm ahead like this and you're going to have to really get stuck in and deal with it, how do you sort of mentally steel yourself for a challenge of that magnitude?
In some ways, strangely exhilarating. I think for anyone in business, if you've been in business for over 32 years, as Venue Search UK has been, you think you've seen it all, and then suddenly, something like a pandemic comes and hits you, and you think, how am I going to deal with this? And your first thoughts are for the staff and how you're going to ensure the company continues without losing any staff and securing jobs, securing salaries, and also managing. You also worry about your suppliers and your clients. We're a very close knit community within the events industry. And when you're faced with a situation where you're getting constant emails saying, venues are closing down, hotels are closing, events cancelling, it's something that none of us have seen in our lifetime. None of us have experienced, and it really is quite shocking. But then you think, well, we're going to have to deal with this. As a company, we've lived through 3 recessions, and we've survived, and we've been stronger. And so we've just got to deal with it. And, I think we have been lucky that, that there has been more government support during this crisis than there has been in the past. The events industry although we got the support, obviously, of furlough and different business loans that were available to all businesses, the events industry itself wasn't particularly mentioned. Or when it was mentioned, I don't think it was particularly being referred to in terms of business events. I think when Boris Johnson referred to events, he was, and when he said he'd make an announcement about events, we all assumed that he was talking about business events, when in fact I think he was talking about more live events and cultural events. So we did have to wait until last week to get any sort of clarity as to when events can take place again, which we now know will be from the 1st of October, albeit on a trial basis at first. So none of us really knows what lies ahead, but we can now start planning for hopefully a prosperous future at some point that further down the line.
And you raised the point earlier that one of the first thoughts that goes through your mind is not just the welfare of the business, but also the welfare of staff as well. And I'm interested to just hone in on that people management side of things for a moment, because mental health and well-being has really been at the forefront of the mind during this pandemic situation, as we all know. And as a business leader, you have to put yourself on the line, basically, and be the person that people can look to for inspiration, direction, reassurance when it's needed. But when you are the one running the business, and almost you might need those things for yourself, and there's nobody to look up to, where is it that you look to for that inspiration as and when you feel you require it?
I think from everyone around me and everyone within the events industry. As I say, there's a lot of people work within the industry. It's about 570,000 people work within the events industry, but within meetings and events in particular, and within meetings and events within the London area. I mean, we do talk to one another. There's a lot of agencies out there, but we've all been very supportive of one another. Clients have been very supportive. Venues, our suppliers have been supportive, and there's been a lot on social media about people offering to support, offering to mentor others within the industry, and to offer support, and that's been very reassuring. And I think when you know that there's nothing that you have done personally that could have changed the situation. There's nothing that that I know that I could have done or our team could have done to allow the company to continue during the pandemic. That you've just got to sort of go with it and say, well, yes, this is going to be a very difficult time, but the most important thing for all of us is to firstly look after our families and make sure that everyone feels comfortable in their situation. And yes, the work situation is dreadful, and we do have to worry about the business. But let's just put personal priorities first for a little time, and then when we're able to have some sort of clarity as to what we can do as a company, then get back to work and put our energies back into that. But it's been very unusual during the pandemic that there's really at some stages you've just felt, well, actually there's nothing that you can do. We've just got to write it out and sort of see what happens. But you mentioned mental health. I mean, that is extraordinarily important and something that the meetings and events industry has really picked up on the past couple of years. And there's been a lot of support for people within the industry who have found things tough during the pandemic, but also prior to that. But I think as someone who runs a business, you have to appreciate that people's experience of the last few months has been very different depending on their personal circumstances, and how the pandemic has been for someone who lives alone has been very different to someone who is, spent lockdown with their family, or other people, have worries about children's schooling, homeschooling, lack of schooling, not sitting exams, or other people working, worried about parents or, relatives in care homes. I think you have got to be very sensitive to the fact that while everyone has been very worried about their jobs and the future of their jobs, they've had an awful lot of other things to worry about as well in some cases.
Exactly right. And thinking now about the future, because we know we are going to have to adjust to a new normal for the foreseeable. Over the next sort of 12 to 18 months, Katherine, what do you think is next for you and for Venue Search and the wider events industry? And what do you hope to achieve as we adjust to these challenges?
I think as a company, our main challenge really is to get back to the position we were in January of this year. We were looking forward to a very busy, a very profitable year. We had a lot of really good, exciting events happening. The business was in a very good place. That has been wiped out. Although events can take place again from the 1st of October, there's a huge fear factor out there. So I think it will be a year, possibly even 2 years, before things go back to what was the normal at the beginning of this year. I think everyone within the team at Venue Search UK is hugely energized and sort of raring to go, and prepared to work flat out to get back to where we were. But it will be difficult. It's going to be difficult for companies of all sizes within the industry. It's going to be very difficult for a lot of venues. There are 10,000 venues within the UK. Some of them will survive, some won't. There's 25,000 businesses in the UK in the event sector. I'm not sure how many of those businesses will still be around in a year's time, in 18 months' time. Most of those businesses are, SMEs. I think we need support. We need more government support. I don't think it's necessarily always recognised by central government, the contribution that the events industry makes to the overall economy. But I'm absolutely sure that everyone within the industry will, be doing their utmost to help rebuild and to allow the industry to thrive and to ensure that we contribute towards the overall economy as we have done in the past.
Let's certainly hope that there will be some positive news to share on that front, and that support that is needed will be forthcoming. Since we can only speculate on what may happen in the future at this point in time, Katherine, I actually think it would be wonderful, just given how informative it's been having you on today, to catch up and have you back on the show with us in a few months just to see how things are getting on at that point, when hopefully there will be some more positive news on the horizon.
Yes, I'd love to do that. Thank you.
I think that would be fantastic. It's been a real pleasure having you join us today, and a most insightful one for myself. And most importantly, Katherine, do continue to take care and stay safe with all still going on in the world at the moment, because we're certainly not out of the woods with COVID-19 yet.
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Scott. Good to speak to you. Thank you.
Likewise. I was speaking today to Katherine Buchan, Director of Venue Search. And for those tuning in and listening today, do please continue to be sensible yourselves with the lifting of lockdown restrictions and stay safe, because it really does help protect yourself and others and makes a real difference in saving lives. Coming up next on the programme today, I'll be handing over to Jonathan White for his exclusive interview with former England cricket captain Sir Andrew Strauss. Since retiring from playing, Sir Andrew has become the Director Director of Cricket for the England and Wales Cricket Board, but during his days as skipper, he joined an illustrious club of just 3 England captains to have secured the Ashes both at home and away in Australia, as well as racking up the second highest number of Test victories for an England skipper in history. I hope that you all enjoy listening, just as much as Jonathan relished the opportunity to speak with Sir Andrew himself, and all of that is, of course, coming up next.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jonathan White, and today we are joined by Sir Andrew Strauss, former captain of the England cricket team and former director of cricket at the ECB. Sir Andrew, thank you very much for joining us today.
Real pleasure to be here. Thank you.
The pleasure is all of ours. You know, and you've had a distinguished career, as I said, both on and off the pitch in English cricket, recognised not least with your knighthood for services to sport just last year. So congratulations on that.
Yeah, thank you.
Now, there have been ups and downs in the career, like any career, including public and private disagreements with certain individuals. And on that front, I think what everybody wants to know, have you finally forgiven Marcus Trescothick for giving you that stupid Lord Brocket nickname?
Well, my recollection was that it wasn't Marcus Trescothick who gave me that nickname. It was actually Mark Butcher.
He's to blame.
You know, I think there were a lot of people. It was the senior England teams at that time who wanted to sort of put me in my place and make sure that I didn't get above my station. So thankfully it didn't particularly stick other than within those group of players.
And you really did try and get on their nerves by getting above your station because, of course, in your first outing, you went on to score 112. Now, am I right in saying this, perhaps, that you only got there because Michael Vaughan did himself an injury?
Well, that was the reason I got on the pitch in the first place. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, it's often sort of misunderstood or misjudged the role that luck plays in an international cricket or sporting career, full stop. And, you know, I was waiting patiently in the wings for an opportunity, and it didn't really seem like an opportunity was going to come along. And then, you know, I've only got injured in the nets, and there was my chance, and I had to kind of grab it with both hands if I could.
And you certainly did. What was it like then to see your name being put up on the Lord's Honour Board after your first appearance?
Yeah, look, I'd just been transported to a completely different world almost. I was a Middlesex player, I was captain of Middlesex, all my focus was on helping Middlesex sort of win the championship and whatever. And then a week later, I've scored a Test century, which is something I'd always dreamed out, you know, literally all my life. And then the thought of doing it at Lord's in your first Test match. I mean, it was literally the dream. So, and then suddenly I started thinking, wow, hold on, potentially I've got a whole England career ahead of me and everything that entails. So it was a real shock to the system. But I suppose what I was grateful for was that I was relatively old, is probably not the right way of putting it, but I was 27 years of age. I was pretty comfortable with my own game, and I was also, I think, mature enough to understand that this was a great opportunity for me, but not to get carried away with it, which is unfortunately what happens with a lot of younger players.
Without a doubt, and I think in those early years of your career, it's so important, I think you'd agree, especially when you're learning from other more experienced people, and this can be true of any field, whether it's sports or politics or business, to have somebody there that you can rely on or look up to for guidance. In those early days, was there somebody that you could say to this day that, thank goodness they were there for you?
Well, I think in preparing me for international cricket, Justin Langer was a massive source of advice for me. So he was captain of Middlesex a couple of years beforehand and really helped me understand what I needed to do to get there. But then I think on the day-to-day basis, my wife Ruth played a huge role, you know, just in terms of, because I think there is that real danger that you get carried away with it and you think international sport in that goldfish bowl that, you know, you're more important than you were previously, or that whole world is the real world. And obviously all we know is that the real world, nothing's changed other than other people's perception of you.
And you need that grounding. And again, that can be true of so many different areas of life.
I think so, yeah. I mean, very easy to get caught up in it and end up doing different things, being with different people, sort of trying to enjoy everything that goes with international cricket rather than focusing on the actual international cricket.
And
itself.
In those early days, Andrew, there were lots of examples where you could have got carried away because that team accomplished so much. I think for a lot of people, the 2005 Ashes series is one of the greatest sporting moments of this country's history. Now, we could chat for hours about that, but I know I wouldn't be allowed to, and you've got other places to be, so we can't do that. But if I may, I would love to ask what your highlight was personally for that, but perhaps more importantly, as a team, how were you able as a group to deal with the pressure no doubt you were feeling?
Yeah, well, the pressure is like nothing else that I experienced before or after, because, I think it's easy to forget how much of a holy grail the Ashes was back then. We hadn't won it for so long, and it seemed like we'd come up against these invincible Australian teams year after year. So, the closer we got to it, the harder it became. I remember Ashley Giles walking into the dressing room for I think it was in the final day of the series, and I looked at him and he looked absolutely terrible, like just white of a sheet, grey. He looked like aged about 5 years. I went, God, Charlie, you're not looking too good. And he went, yeah, it's not surprising. I haven't slept for 8 weeks. And I went, well, join the club. And I think we'd all been sort of living this behind our own closed doors. And it's just an extraordinary thing. And without doubt, the highlight was, number one, drawing that game at the Oval to make sure we won the Ashes, but also the day after, that open-top bus parade around London, and to understand that we'd broken out of the cricket bubble, that they're just general sports fans or just people that were interested in seeing England win at something were all engaged and completely besotted by the whole thing.
I think that's such a key point now, because there were so many people back in 2005 that may have not even given cricket a second glance, and it put a whole new generation, especially of children, school kids, into loving that sport. And so beyond the actual competition itself, what a fantastic thing to be able to say was accomplished for
absolutely. Everything you say there is absolutely right. Like we just sort of opened the doors of cricket to a whole new generation. But probably more importantly, it was the one and only time in my life that I got papped outside a nightclub that night when we were celebrating. I felt like I'd really arrived as a celebrity. Yes. It only happened for that one night, unfortunately.
But I did ask for a highlight, and if you didn't perhaps give a specific one on the pitch, so I would suggest perhaps that catch at Trent Bridge.
No. I mean, the catch at Trent Bridge was, you see a ball, you stick out your hand and it goes in. I think my personal highlight was I scored 100 in that fifth test match under real pressure. And that was one that, that wasn't a moment. That was a number of hours, and I had to dig pretty deep to do that.
Now, obviously, not that long later, and you were lucky enough and privileged, I'm sure, no doubt, to serve as captain. And whether you like it or not, you become the focal point of criticism. You were looked on, up to, and relied upon to be strong, especially when the going gets tough. You become a leader in many senses of the word. During your time as captain, what qualities does one require to fulfill that role?
Well, a fair amount of resilience for starters. You're absolutely right. I remember when I got the role, it did feel like the biggest sort of poison chalice of all time, and sort of a litany of England captains had sort of been churned up by the job prior to me taking over. So there was that sort of realization this is going to be a tough thing to do, and you're going to have to dig pretty deep. But I think actually the most important thing was sort of just pushing all that noise to one side and just clarifying, okay, if I'm going to do this job, what is it that we really want to achieve out of this? And so suddenly that becomes a bit more exciting and a bit more enticing, the idea of, well, we can do something that's never been done before here, and I've got the opportunity to play my part in that. So, I think that was a big part of it for me. I think a lot of those qualities around leadership, I don't think you have them until you're in that situation. Absolutely. It's very hard to prepare yourself properly for those sort of situations.
And when managing a team, you're required to manage, of course, what some people could call big personalities. Others could use different, shorter words. How poisonous can it be, when players, and indeed, and this applies again to so many different areas of life, when individuals think they are perhaps more important than a team?
Well, I think probably worth broadening out that a bit. You know, I think there are all sorts of different people that you have to sort of contend with in a team environment, and the job of the leadership or the management is to try and sort of gel them all together and get them bought into what you're trying to do and whatever. So, you know, there are some people that are a bit more self-absorbed. There's some people that are slightly more maverick in the way they view the world. There's some people that are very quiet. There's some people that are, you know, perhaps very worried about what might go wrong. And so you've got to try and understand all these people individually and try and get the best out of them. But there was definitely a line there for me in terms of embracing difference up to the point where someone following their agenda was going in a completely different path from the team's agenda. And, you know, if and when that happens, that should be a problem for a leadership. And if it isn't a problem, then you're not doing your job properly.
Absolutely. And with all that in mind, actually, and perhaps this is a bit of a mean question, but what advice would you give to others in a similar position, leading a team, being looked up to? What would be the key advice you'd give to them, and that you couldn't really do without it?
Just generally about leading a team?
I think so, yes.
Okay, number one thing about leadership, I'm absolutely certain about this, is that the people you're leading need to know that you care about them. And if they genuinely believe you've got their best interests at heart, they will forgive all sorts of other inadequacies you might have, and I definitely had many, because they'll know your heart's in the right place, and they'll feel comforted. There'll be a degree of sort of psychological safety or whatever you might term to make sure that the team comes together when the going gets tough. If they genuinely don't believe you care about them and you're in it for yourself, doesn't matter how charismatic you might be. It doesn't matter, you know, how gregarious and how impressive you might be as a person. They will be wary of you, and they will start looking after their own interests very quickly.
Now, in 2015, obviously, you were appointed as Director of Cricket at the ECB. You took some pretty major steps early on. You brought in Trevor Bayliss as coach, was brought in. You put a much greater emphasis on limited overs cricket. Now, in the abstract, what had you identified that needed to be changed for English cricket? And were there qualities that you had developed, you'd found out you had as England captain, that you were able to bring over to the job?
Okay, so the first thing was we had this unbelievable opportunity of the World Cup on home soil in 2019. I was sick and tired of watching us make the same mistakes in World Cups, and this includes my time as captain. We just kept on sleepwalking our way into it and pretending everything would be all right on the night, and it never was. And so I definitely made it our priority to win that 2019 World Cup. I thought that was more important than anything else that was going to be taking place in my tenure. And I knew in order to do that, we had to completely shift our perception of white ball cricket.
Quite a radical shift from what we were coming from.
Yeah, but the rest of the game had moved on. And the rest of the game had understood that white ball cricket was playing an increasingly important role in both financially, but also in terms of players' focus and interest. Yes. And we had to move. In fact, we didn't have to move at times. We need to get ahead of the time. So, you know, we had to completely shift both our philosophy, but also the way we played in order to do that. And I was very lucky having both Trevor Bayliss and Owen Morgan, who were prepared to sort of role model that and lead that through. And the second part of your question around what had the England captaincy sort of done to prepare me for the role, I think I was comfortable leading. I knew the environment. I knew what I was getting myself into. And in the early days, I could leverage some of the relationships that I had with the players. But actually, I found it a very different challenge because you are so far removed from what's going on the ground. Right. And so, you know, you're relying on other people to have to, you know, buy into what you want to happen and then do it themselves. And often, you know, in different time zones in different parts of the world. So that was a very new experience for me.
Well, I think the strategy paid off, and I don't know about you, but when watching that World Cup final again, as so many people did in this country, it's once again inspired another generation of especially school kids who, again, might not have given cricket a second look, who have now become avid cricket fans. I know of some, and what a wonderful thing that must be.
Yeah, it was an incredible day, wasn't it? I mean, I think in our vision, like when we're talking about the opportunity of winning the 2019 World Cup, I had this vision in my mind of Lords on a sunny day and a close finish and the incredible kind of, emotion that went with it. No one could have dreamt how it played out. I've never seen anything. I've never seen a game of cricket like that in my whole life, and for it to be the World Cup final was quite extraordinary.
I know some fantastically avid cricket fans who were Googling there and then what exactly the rules became, because
so was I, actually, yeah. Absolutely.
Now, Andrew, in your wife's memory, you established the Ruth Strauss Foundation last year. In doing so, whether you'd admit it or not, yourself and the foundation has become an inspiration to thousands, husbands and wives, mothers and fathers, sons and daughters. Please do take some time, if you wouldn't mind, and you to explain to the listeners the work the foundation does and what it's been like to lead a project like that.
Yeah, thanks. Well, look, I mean, we obviously had a very tough journey as a family. First of all, Ruth being diagnosed. Ruth was someone that was always well. You'd never think she was going to be someone that was sort of laid down by cancer. And for us to find out that she had lung cancer was extraordinary. She'd never smoked a cigarette in her life. And I think we all had this perception of lung cancer being a smoker's disease.
Absolutely.
And so just having gone through the experience and obviously some very low times and us coming to terms with the fact that Ruth had stage 4 cancer and she was going to die, we learnt a lot in that process. And thankfully we had time for me to speak to Ruth before she died about legacy and what we could do to make something positive come out of this experience we'd all been through. And so after she died in December 2018, I came back and launched the foundation with two focuses. Number one, to fund research into these rare forms of lung cancer. These are the non-smoking lung cancers. 5,000 to 7,000 people each year in this country are diagnosed with these. No one knows why they're getting them, but they're on the increase, and it's young women that are affected more than men.
Extraordinary numbers.
Yeah, I mean, in the list of top 10 cancers, it's number 8. Rare forms of lung cancer, number 8. So it's not really rare. It's probably a misnomer, but it's, we're really lacking in funding and understanding. And then the second element, and probably this is in some ways more pressing, is to help anyone who's got cancer who has an incurable diagnosis, to help them and their families prepare themselves for death. And so in order to do that, we need to be able to find ways of them having open conversations with each other, because if you do this well, it should help the bereavement afterwards if you're well prepared for it. It's not something people like to do. I was very lucky that Ruth wanted to do it. But also we have to have that debate about the taboo of death and, effectively how uncomfortable we are talking about it, and certainly how bad we are preparing for it. If you think for a moment about antenatal classes before you have your baby, like how we're preparing you for how your life's going to change, and we do nothing around death, even though we're all going to experience it in one way, shape, or form. And I think as a society we need to be better than that. We've come a long way in so many different areas, and especially around mental health, and we can do better about death. There's no doubt about it.
Well, I think the foundation is leading the way in breaking taboos on that front, because they need to be broken. I know the foundation is going out some events later this year, so if you could tell us about some of those, that would be...
Yeah, so we've got a couple of big ones coming up. So the Westminster Mile, which is a very inclusive, if you're think about a marathon, but just think about just doing a mile of a marathon rather than 26.
Sounds ideal.
So we've got grandparents, we've got little kids, we've got people pushing prams, so that we're going to get as many people as possible to play their part in that and raise some funds. We've got the Red for Ruth Day at Lords again, so that was an incredible day for us last year.
Whether you were there or not, especially if you were there, I mean to say, but whether it was the photos in the papers the next day, what an I think it was the 15th of April, wasn't it? What an extraordinary day, and what an overwhelming day that must have been for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, an Ashes Test match is a big day anyway,
Yes.
and then for us to have that extra element of the Red for Ruth Day, and to see the wave of support, myself and the boys were incredibly profoundly affected by that in a good way. We felt so much love and support there, and then the foundation is directly benefited hugely by the funds raised, and we want to take it up a gear this year and make it more of a community thing, not just the day at Lord's.
I even saw some of the stuffiest members of the MCC, Andrew, wearing red. So what an extraordinary thing.
Yeah, well, a lot of them wear red trousers anyway, I think. But no, absolutely, they were right behind us, and we really want that to be something that's embedded in the English summer, just like the McGrath Foundation Days in Sydney in Australia.
Well, it's been a complete inspiration, and I very much hope we can talk about that perhaps late in a few months as well.
Absolutely.
Before we go, as I'm conscious of the time, it's also an exciting year for domestic cricket, not least because of the introduction of the 100, not without its critics, Andrew, I know you're a big proponent of it. The Blast has clearly shown that the short form of the game has brought cricket to a new and growing audience, exciting games. What do you say to those that ask, why do we need the 100 as well?
So the 100 is the most important step forward in domestic cricket in this country ever. And the reason for that is that increasingly, there's two things. First of all, we need to break out of the cricket bubble. So the Blast followers tend to be the same people that follow other cricket.
Right.
And therefore, that's a small audience and potentially a declining one over time, even though the Blast sales are increasing. We need to break out of that and try and get more general sports fans into cricket. But more importantly, just the way the tournament's set up, and it's one game a day over a 6-week period, broadcasters will pay money for that. And therefore, what we're trying to do is reduce our reliance on international cricket paying all the bills. If you think about Test cricket and some of the issues around the world, we just can't rely on that money coming in to fund the game. So we need to find another way of doing that. I just think it's going to be an incredible success. I'm so excited about it. I know there are people that are worried about it, but in 2 or 3 years' time, we're going to have our own short form tournament that will rival the Big Bash, and we'll be moving towards the IPL. And those are two enormous events out there, and we can have our own version of that ourselves.
I can feel your enthusiasm for it. As an Essex fan, I'm still stumped as to, I think I'm going to have to choose between either supporting a team based at the Oval or a team based at Lord's. I'll get over that, but I'll have to do it.
Well, surely it's got to be the Lord's one, right?
Of course.
Yeah.
Sanju, it's been an absolute pleasure discussing that and everything else with you today. Thank you very much.
Cheers.
This has been the Leaders Council podcast. Thank you for celebrating excellence in leadership with us. I've been your host, Scott Challoner. Until next time, goodbye. Thank you for listening to our podcast. The views expressed within the podcast do not reflect the views of the Leaders Council of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, its parent company or subsidiaries, members of staff, or other guests of any other person therein associated.